Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. I'm joined in the studio today by Mark Hornsby, Sweetwater's Director of Studio Operations, and Lynn Fuston, Manager of Written Content here at Sweetwater. And we've got a pretty amazing project to tell you about. Lynn, what are we talking about?
A vocal mic shootout. We put 50 microphones in the studio and listen to male and female vocals through all of them.
That's a pretty ambitious project.
It's huge.
Right. So where did this come from? Where did the idea come from?
There's so many customers that want to know what microphones sound like, and they read on the web and they read on the site. They read everything they can to find out what they sound like, but most don't have a chance to actually hear the microphones.
Right.
So the difference between reading somebody's impression about what a microphone sounds like and actually hearing it yourself, it's night and day.
Right, right.
So that's what it is.
So Mark, you've done obviously a lot of microphone comparisons, and you have access to an amazing mic locker in Sweetwater Studios. How did this differ from the day-to-day way that you choose microphones?
Well, I think day-to-day, like a lot of people, engineers, people have preferences. You know, the guys that work in the studios, they have go-to microphones that they like, and we don't have every microphone in the world back there. So this was an opportunity to put up a whole bunch of microphones in a non-biased environment and listen to them out of context of day-to-day music workflow. You know, we're focusing on vocals, we're focusing on making sure the levels are all correct. There was a lot of preparation and steps that went into that. And it's not like working on a record where you've got your go-to mics, you throw up one or two things and you go, oh, let's use that while you're listening to a whole bunch of different instrumentation.
Right. So given that difference, Lynn, what does somebody take away from listening to 50 different microphones?
The takeaway for listening to 50 different microphones is that you can hear one microphone that somebody might typically say is very, very bright, and you listen to it and you go, that just sounds good to me. It sounds clear to me. Another one that people might say is warm, you might listen to and say, that just sounds dark. It sounds dull.
Right.
So it's the opportunity to just hear with your own two ears what they sound like.
Right.
It debunks a lot of myths. You know, we all have, I think all of us are guilty of that. We have preconceptions about, well, that piece of gear sounds like this, or this microphone sounds like that. And in reality, sometimes we're right, and then sometimes we're like, well, when's the last time I actually listened to this? Versus something I read on a forum, or what a friend told me, or what I saw in a music video, or an in the studio video. So it kind of breaks down walls of reality and perception.
Right, right. And for so many of us, the way that we actually hear microphones is after they've been mixed in a production and gone through mastering. And so comparing that to what it actually sounds like in the studio when the vocalist is just stepping up and singing can be a very different thing from what you hear on a final production.
Right, just the raw vocal.
Right.
That was the amazing thing to me, and the reason I enjoy doing these is you line them all up and then you sort of listen without paying any attention to which is which, and you listen to A, B, C, D, and then all of a sudden E comes on and you go, oh, wow.
Right.
What is that?
Right.
And sometimes you look at the list and you go, oh, that's $9,000. And it's like, oh, okay, so that's what $9,000 gets you.
Right.
But other times you listen to it and you go, man, that sounds really good. What is that? And it's $200. So that's what I love about them, is out of these 50 microphones, I went back and counted, there's 26 of them I'd ever used before. So the rest of them I'd never heard, ever.
Right, right. And you've heard a lot of microphones.
I've heard a lot of microphones. And so I discovered several microphones that it's like, I'm going to have to get one of those.
Right, right. Well, I think we should talk about, we have 50 microphones, and those were selected out of the hundreds and hundreds that Sweetwater carries.
Yeah.
And we tried to choose a range of prices from $50 up to $9,000, something like that.
Yep.
And we focused very specifically on large diaphragm condensers.
Yes, side address condensers.
Side address.
Yeah.
And we also specifically focused on female vocals and male vocals.
Right.
So let's talk about the process, because in my mind, I've looked at mic shootouts that people have done before, and there's always been some kind of failings there, if you will. You could look at it and say, well, that wasn't really unbiased, or that wasn't comparing apples to apples. How did you ensure, once you had these 50 microphones, that the process was going to truly be unbiased and that you were going to be very rigorous about comparing the microphones?
Well, first off, just backing up a little bit, when they wheel the cart in and it's got 50 microphones in boxes and it's stacked about this high and about this wide and this long, it's overwhelming. It's just like, wow, what have we gotten ourselves into?
Right.
And it took a day to set it up, took 2 days to record, and another day to get everything back in the boxes. The only way to make sure that you're doing a fair comparison from mic to mic to mic to mic is to put them all in the same space, at exactly the same height, same distance from the singer, and make sure that they're calibrated.
What does that mean, calibrated?
Calibrated, you need to make sure the levels are all the same going into the microphones. The singer is going to be consistent, hopefully consistent, but you need to make sure, because the gain on all the microphones is going to be different. In this particular test, some of the microphones only required 10 dB of gain. Some of the microphones required 39 dB of gain. And it's fairly well known that something that's louder is going to sound better. So if you put two microphones, even two identical microphones up, and one is 3 dB louder than the other, then you're going to say, oh yeah, that one sounds better, even though the only difference is the fact that it's louder.
Right.
So what we have to do is very, very carefully control the volume to make sure it's a level playing field.
And what was the process you went through to do that?
Oh, it was intense. Step one, we got all the microphones on stands that would not, we used latch leg stands to make sure they wouldn't sag, because everybody's used a stand where you start with the vocal here, and then, you know, by the chorus it's down here, and then it just keeps coming down. So we used the latch leg stands to make sure they were all the same. We checked with Nick DiVirgilio, who was singing, and get the microphone at the right height, and then we measured that. We measured the distance from his voice to the microphone, and then we had him sing to see how loud he was going to be singing, and then set the gain with the first microphone that way. Okay. Then we went back and took a 1K tone, a 1 kilohertz tone, through a speaker in front of the microphone, in front of each microphone, and put out the same level in front of each microphone. And we calibrated that for distance, for the center of the diaphragm, and height. We locked it all down, and every microphone was calibrated that way. So that's how we did it.
That's a lot of work right there.
It's a lot of work.
And what preamp did you use for this?
We used a Millennium Media HV3R.
Which allowed you to get how close in your calibration?
It's stepped in 1 dB stepped. There are other preamps that have continuously variable. They're typically not that accurate. And some are 5 dB steps, and it's like, you know, the Millennium Media is very, very clean. It's very, very quiet.
Right.
When we were checking it out to begin with, we ran all the gain on all of them up to 69 dB, and the noise floor was just barely noticeable at all. So that was the reason we chose that.
Right.
The other reason we chose that is it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles. There's not a lot of variables. You can't change input impedance. It doesn't have drive and other switches and things like that. It's a known in the industry. So that's what we did. And so we calibrated all those within 1 dB. And then we printed the tone so we could come back and adjust those later to get the differences to within 1/10 of a dB.
Right, so it was accurate to within 1/10 of a dB from microphone to microphone. Right, which is a pretty painstaking process to make that happen. You know, normally when you're recording, you're not working that in that small increments.
No.
So Mark, when you're setting something like that up, you were running Pro Tools and getting it all configured. How did you set that up so you could efficiently move from microphone to microphone and not have the singer waiting as you went?
We did them in banks of 8 microphones. So we set up 8 microphones, and we had it already height-wise and everything measured out in the room. So every time we switched a mic, we could get the capsules exactly where the previous 8 were. So we set up 8 microphones, male vocal, a verse, a chorus, female vocal, verse, and a chorus. I had to get a box for Kat, the other singer, to stand on, because she's not as tall as Nick.
Right.
So we could get that height exactly the same in terms of capsule ratio to their mouth, and you have that same distance.
Yeah, because when you're calibrating 50 microphones, you don't want to calibrate them for the male and then turn around and calibrate them all again for the female. So we were trying to find the most efficient way to do that.
Yeah, and to set up 50 microphones in one space in any acoustical environment is going to sound different in any particular point in that room. You know, Studio A here at Sweetwater sounds great, but one wall's got glass, one wall's got windows up high and has absorption underneath it. So to have them all in a confined space to where each bank of 8 is in the same acoustical environment is also important.
Right, for reflections from around the room and
Right.
all that that effect. One thing that I've noticed people miss before in shootouts is they'll measure, but they actually measure to the grill of the microphone. What's the problem there?
Every grill is different.
Right,
Right.
where the diaphragm sits is different inside each of those microphones. So you guys actually had to go through with a flashlight, figure out where the center of the diaphragm was, both forward and back, side to side, up, down, because it varies in all those microphones.
Right. Well, and this brings up another point. No matter how careful you are and how scientific you try to be, there's always going to be one little thing. And so we did the first 8 and sang through the first 8, and then realized that one of the singers was measuring with the string. We used a string to make sure the distance was the same from her mouth to the front of the head basket, which, sometimes the head basket is a half an inch away from the diaphragm. Sometimes it's an inch and a half away from the diaphragm.
Right,
So it's like, so we had to go back and do them all over again.
right.
It's like, okay, same string, measure to that center line so that you're the same distance from the diaphragm. Because as anybody who's worked with microphones and compared knows, especially when you're dealing with cardio, is you've got proximity effect.
Right.
So if you're an inch closer to the microphone, it's going to sound different than if you're an inch farther away. So if you're doing a comparison and on one microphone you're 3 inches away and on one microphone you're 5 inches away, it may look very similar to the singer, but it's not going to sound the same, even on the same microphone.
Right.
So we had to be very, very consistent about that.
So I have to ask, the one variable here that is uncontrollable, if you will, is the performance of the vocalist. So why not just put a speaker up and play music through the speaker and use that for your source?
How many people are recording speakers with the microphones at home?
Right.
That's
a good question.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. Is what we were trying to do is get rid of variables. But what I've come to before when I've considered doing this is, okay, if you have a singer, especially if you get a professional studio singer who can sing very, very consistently, they're going to give you a really reliable, repeatable performance. Think about the variables that you introduce when you put a speaker in front of a microphone. Let's work our way back. One, is it a single way? Is it a coaxial speaker, or is it a two-way speaker? If it's a two-way speaker, where are you as far as the intercept between the woofer and the tweeter? Some speakers, because of the dispersion on the high end, if you get too close, it's going to sound different. So there's that. There's the amplifier that's in the speaker. There's the original microphone it was recorded with, the original preamp, the original converter. So in order to eliminate one variable, you're introducing about 8 more variables. But the bottom line is, like Mark said, it's like how many people are actually miking speakers?
Right. The other difference, to my mind, is that a speaker certainly moves air, but not the same way that a singer's mouth does. You don't get pee-pops off of a speaker, for example,
Right.
in most cases that I'm familiar with. And so there's those kind of things that are created by a singer that result in the air that a speaker doesn't necessarily do.
Absolutely.
And it's funny you mentioned that. We didn't use a pop filter on any of these. And for the most part, Nick and Kat are both comfortable sitting in front of a microphone. They knew there wasn't a pop filter there. So they were sensitive, trying to be sensitive when they were singing, when they would hit a P that might be plosive. But even though they're doing that, some of the microphones it reacts fine to. You don't hear them at all. And some of the microphones, you still hear a lot of it, which is another good comparison sign, between the different mics, the different capsules, how they're performing in terms of low end and proximity effect.
Right.
So that's interesting too. At first glance, when we were listening back to the files and you'd hear a pop, you go, it's got a pop in there. But actually that's not a bad thing in this type of comparison, because this isn't going on a record. This is for us to listen to how a piece of equipment is responding.
Right. Right. I was very impressed. I sat in on the sessions and observed some of the setup and also Nick and Kat singing. How consistent they really were. It was very impressive as they went from take to take to take. And we were very careful about comparing earlier takes because we were doing in banks to 8, so we go back and refresh and work forward. And there was a lot of thought even in a process to doing that, so they would be very consistent. Were there other things that the singers had to contend with?
Fatigue. I mean, it's not. I don't care how good of a scener you are. If you're going to scene the same thing 50 times, and you're constantly referencing it in a certain way, that's taxing for, I think, any musician, despite what you're singing or what you're playing. And we're only human. You know, starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, temperature, you know, where's the moon at, you know, all the important stuff. It takes a lot on our end listening to them and making sure, okay, that's the same, and them doing the same as well. You know, what had I seen before? All right, new bank of 8, let me hear a clip of what I did. Okay, and we're good. So concentrating on placement, dynamics, note choice on the performance, you get so focused on that stuff, then fatigue sets in, and then, oh yeah, there's that whole pitch thing. Stuff that you normally focus on a lot when you're recording a vocal track, like pitch, for example, isn't as important, still important, but not as important as placement, what notes, where are they at physically, don't move, you know, trying to capture all of these physical attributes to make it repeatable.
Right. That was one thing I noticed watching the two of them saying, is that most singers who have experience both in the studio and on stage, they work the microphone. They come in, they go back, they move off axis a little bit or whatever. They had to be very careful to really position themselves and hold themselves right there.
Yeah.
That introduces a lot of variables.
They were thrilled about that too.
Yeah, I bet. But that's a fatiguing thing too.
It is.
To have to maintain that level of
Think
consistency.
about not moving.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, most people don't realize. I've been very fortunate to work with professionals, and a lot of people don't have that luxury, and don't have a singer that can deliver exactly the same performance 50 times in a row. That know exactly what they've done and can remember what they've done, and just deliver a great take.
Right.
With some people, you know, if you get one good take out of 50, you're lucky. So.
We did these marathon session and recorded all the vocals. What happened after that? Was there EQ?
We
Was there
backed it all
processing?
up on a hard drive immediately.
Immediately, yeah.
And then had a
The
party.
most important thing, right?
Just back that up.
Got your breath for a couple hours, and then what happened? Was there
That's
EQ applied? Was there compression? They were singing along with tracks, and then you were soloing those tracks. Were you doing different things in those situations?
So once we got done backing everything up, naming, you know, going back through and making sure everything is named properly, checking it against our sheet. File management is huge when we're delivering 50 different files. Male
Times
vocal,
4.
Times 4.
Right.
So, you know, getting all the file management stuff done, but the raw files that people are able to download, there's no EQ after the fact, there's no compression after the fact. They are the actual take from the microphone to the preamp into Pro Tools 2496 wave. You can open the Pro Tools session, you can import the files into other digital audio workstations, and you're hearing what we heard that day in the studio.
So there actually are two different ways that these are available, right? Or actually three if you want to think about it that way. There's a full Pro Tools session that has the full resolution files that you can download and open up in Pro Tools.
Yep.
There's a download that has just the audio files that you can load into any DAW.
Right.
And they all line up right at 0 and they'll all play back and you can compare that way. But we also have a page at sweetwater.com where you can click on previews. Now what's happening with those previews?
The previews are just like you would find at iTunes. It's a round radio button that has a play and pause. And what you can do is we've made 320K MP3s, which are higher resolution than even iTunes. And with those files, we took 10-second snippets. The originals are a minute long with a wide dynamic range. With these, we took 10-second snippets of the male and female vocals soloed and the male and female vocals with tracks. And somebody can go through the page and pick a microphone and just click that button and hear it. So with those, we did apply some compression on the tracks to make sure that the level was compatible with something that someone would be listening to online.
Right, because you might play those back on computer speakers, on your phone, or whatever, with earbuds, and a little bit of compression helps. So to truly get the experience of comparing these microphones, you need to download either the high-resolution files and load them into your DAW, or download the Pro Tools session if you have Pro Tools.
Oh, absolutely. And our hope is that the people who are wanting to listen to all these microphones want to hear the best example that they can, without any compromises in audio fidelity at all. So our hope is that they'll download those and take the time to go through and listen to them, because we did soft phrases, they're loud phrases, you can hear just all kinds of difference between them.
Low, high, there's
Everything.
Tried to cover the kind of the range of a
A
vocalist.
huge range. And the snippets that are online are just, it's a phrase. It's 10 seconds.
It's a preview.
It's a preview, that's all it is.
Right, right.
So the 10-second clips that are online that are the vocal and the playback track, they do have a hair of reverb on them. There is no EQ, and there's also a little bit of compression. In particular, on the female vocal performance track, the dynamic difference between the verse and the chorus is very drastic. And we wanted to create an experience to where if people are listening on their phone or their tablet or their laptop, to where the sound wasn't jumping up and down. So we did apply compression. So on just those playback, those 10-second clips of the vocal and the track, there's a little bit of compression, and there's just a little bit of reverb for more of a real-world experience. There's no EQ. There's no EQ on the backing track, and there's no EQ on the vocal. But there's just enough glue there to where when you're just playing back those 10-second clips, they're consistent. They got a little bit of verb on there for more of a real-world pseudo mix kind of example. But when you download the files, none of that stuff is there. It's all unprocessed 2496 waves.
Right.
And somebody can go back and add compression, they can add EQ, they can add delays, they can play like it's in a real mix and set it up so that this is exactly what they'd sound like in a mix, and then swap from A to B to C to E all the way down.
More importantly, they can hear what it would sound like on how they would mix it in their own studio. You know, everybody's got their own go-to plugins, compressors, reverb, effects, vocal chains. They can process these files and audition those in their own studio the way they like to work.
Right, right. And still hear the difference in the microphones.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So speaking of that, you guys have heard a lot of microphones, you've done a lot of comparisons. Was there really that dramatic of a difference between all these microphones? When you got 50 microphones there, by the time you listen to them, they all just sound the same?
No, absolutely there's a difference. You know, when you get and the differences stand out more when they're back to back like that. You know, what you think a certain microphone sounds like, and in reality having it right next to 7 others extremely fast, and then once we did all 50 and you go through them, it's amazing the differences that you not only hear, but you realize that some things you thought were north are actually south, and vice versa, and there's some pleasant surprises in there, and there's some stuff in there that you go, wow, I never thought that sounded like that.
For me, being able to listen to them over the course of 2 days as we recorded versus being able to go A, B, C, D in rapid fire, it's shocking how much difference there is between them. It really is amazing.
So are there particular things people should be listening for as they're auditioning these microphones?
One of the interesting things, and I always learn stuff when I do this, one of the interesting things to me is that there were certain microphones that would stand out and I would go, man, that sounds great on the verse. On the chorus, maybe not so much. But then there are some microphones that sounded great on the chorus. On the verse, I really didn't care for it that much. So where I always end up is I need more microphones. That's just me. I just always
Right.
end up needing more microphones.
Right.
Another observation, a lot of people get focused on the solo button, which is why that track is in there. So if you want to solo it, you can. But the bigger challenge is don't solo it. Listen to those tracks in context with the playback track. And that's more telling sometimes than just listening to a soloed recording. You know, soloed is great because it's like, all right, how's it feel? You know, turn it up, turn it down. But at the end of the day, when we're working on music, people listening to a song don't hear a soloed vocal. They hear a vocal in the context of a track. So that's really where the rubber meets the road, in my opinion, is how does it sound in the track?
Right.
You know, 50 microphones, the track stays the same. So the track is equally important and in some degree a very common ground for the entire thing.
Right. Building on what both of you said, I expected hearing all these microphones that this one would be brighter, this one would be darker, this one would have more low end, this one would be more mid-rangey. I expected those kind of differences. What I was amazed at was the dynamic differences between the microphones. The way that even some of the less expensive microphones really had powerful dynamic shifts between the soft and the loud parts. And that was something I found myself really focusing on as I was listening, especially in the context of the tracks, like you were talking about there, because it's going to make a difference in, first of all, the way the vocal is perceived with those dynamics, but it's also going to make a difference when you start applying compression.
Sure. Picking the right microphone, whether you have 3 or 4 microphones in your collection or 50, it doesn't matter. But getting the right microphone, and right translates to correct for that particular day, that particular song, that particular singer.
That's huge.
That's what a lot of this is about too. When you find the right match for what you're recording that day, that does so much of the heavy lifting into the mixing process than trying to correct something that was recorded on, let's say, a really bright or harsh singer recorded on a really bright microphone. That's really hard to undo after the fact. But if you get a darker microphone for a singer like that, or vice versa, however you want to, cut it up, then a lot of the work's done, and all you got to do is turn up the fader, add a little bit of compression, reverb, whatever your style is, but you're not going down this corrective path of, I got to turn down the top end, and now I don't hear the articulation, and that's a very frustrating place to be, and we've all been there. So hopefully this will help educate and maybe minimize some of those hardships down the road.
Right, right.
The other thing, I think sometimes people are looking for a microphone, like the perfect microphone that's going to sound good on everybody. Doesn't exist. There's not a holy grail microphone. I've got some microphones that sound great on 70% of the people, but sometimes I'll put up my best microphone through my best preamp and somebody will stand up to sing and it's like, wow, that really sounds bad. I mean, it just does. It's like unusably bad. And then it's like, okay, I got to dig for something else and find something else. There really is not a perfect holy grail vocal mic. So, one of the advantages of doing things like this is you find, okay, if I've already got this one, where's another one that'll contrast with that would work on that other 30% of the vocalists that might come in the door.
We're real fortunate to have Lynn involved in this because he has such a history in the word shootout. You've done a lot of recordings comparing microphones and microphone preamps. And I remember being at one of those sessions, years ago in Nashville. And
You were?
I was.
I don't remember that.
Well, you never spoke to me anyway. But that said, even today, going through this process, he's done these before. You've done shootouts. We've done shootouts together in the studio. You still hear stuff to where you go, wow, I wouldn't have expected that. Mm-hmm. And even when you think you know a lot, there's always something that comes along. Maybe it's a new microphone, or maybe it's just you haven't heard that microphone on a singer that sounds like that. There's always that thing on forums, what's the best microphone for vocals? And that's kind of a rabbit hole that just never ends. It's an open-ended question, and it's self-defeating in a lot of ways, but the intent is pure, I think. People just want to get a great performance. And to hear a wide range of microphones like this in a non-biased environment, there's none of us sitting there going, you need to like this one or you need to like that one. It's just here's what they are. I think it's very educational, and it was certainly educational for us. There were inexpensive microphones where we said, wow, I can't believe that sounds that good. Mm-hmm. And there were microphones that were several $1,000s that we thought, wow, I thought that sounded different than I remember it. So there's a lot of education, and hopefully it's a lot of fun for people that are checking them out.
For people of that mindset. For people that think, hey, sitting down and listening to 50 microphones, that sounds like a good time.
Yeah.
But no, it's very educational, and I always learn stuff. That's the reason that I do this, is just, it expands your horizons. It's sort of like, it's like getting new colors on the palette. And you're accustomed to working with these particular colors, and it's like, oh, and then you hear something and you think, that, I might not use it on vocal, but that would sound amazing on? This type of guitar or something like that. I love exploring and finding things like that out.
Right.
Because you can't have enough tools.
I love what Lynn said there. The word color is a great word to use. You love blue, you like red, I like green. Everybody's got, preferences, everybody's got favorites. This isn't about a better than, best than scenario. This is about comparing technology and hopefully applying that resource to your own art and what you're trying to do as an educational tool. There's a lot of great products out there. We know that, obviously, here at Sweetwater. People go down that, I use the word rabbit hole of better than, best. They're searching for some holy grail a lot of times because vocals are so important. That doesn't exist. They're just different, Every scener's different. Every microphone on any given number of sceners is going to sound different. And hopefully this will help educate and break down some of those barriers, especially when people get confused on, oh, this microphone's the same price as that microphone, but how does it sound different and why? I'm looking at this frequency response chart. What does that mean? Well, just use your ears.
Right.
Check out the files and just use your ears.
Right, right. Well, guys, I have to say congratulations, because I've been a part of a lot of shootouts and a lot of comparisons, and I've never seen anyone do things in such a rigorous fashion and be so scientific about making sure that you're really comparing apples to apples. And so the opportunity to sit down and hear these microphones in that type of hyper-controlled environment, that type of hyper-controlled situation, man, it's just amazing. So thank you for all the work you guys put in, because it was a tremendous amount of work.
It really was. The other thing I wanted to point out is it's very, very enlightening when you said colors, or I said colors. Just when you see...
I said colors first.
You said colors first, okay. When you see the analogy I come back to is tools. It's like, okay, if you had to pick one hammer, it's like, okay, well, would you rather have, if your one hammer is a sledgehammer, then when you're trying to do finish work, you're out of luck. So every time I do microphone shootouts, I always come away going, okay, there's a tool that I don't have. That one fits a need that I don't have.
Right.
And I may have 20 or 30 microphones, but it's like, that one, I don't have that color. And there are some microphones that just sound incredibly dark.
Uh-huh.
You could put them on a vocal and go, I can't imagine ever using that. But on a kick drum, or on a bass cabinet, or on a huge orchestral bass drum, man, that kind of bottom
Or a voice
end.
that's thin and really bright.
Oh, a voice that's, yeah, absolutely.
Right. So
Again, it's just tools.
Right,
It's
right.
tools in the tool chest.
Right.
So,
And I got to say, props to Lynn on all of this, because he's done these shootouts, and he's the most thorough person I've ever met on getting it right, even down to same microphone cable brand, same 30-foot length, whether it's going from the power supply on a tube condenser into the wall or whether it's going from the microphone to the wall, all the cables had to be exactly the same length, exactly the same brand. So that's pretty thorough.
That's pretty tweaky.
So hats off to you.
well, thank you. For these comparisons to have any meaning at all, they really have to be single variable. You have to control everything from, microphone cable type, all these things that we know may make little differences. I mean, it may only be 0.5% or 1%, but things like the distance, the space in the room, the length of the microphone cable, everything makes a difference. Any engineer knows that everything makes a difference.
Right.
And it's the only way to have a fair comparison where you can compare A to B to C to D is to make sure everything other than that one microphone is exactly the same.
Right.
So,
Well, that's an amazing achievement. Thanks, guys. We
Thank you, Mitch.
appreciate you taking time today to sit down with us and describe the process and what you went through there, because it is an amazing opportunity for people to hear these microphones. I really can't overemphasize that.
it really is. The number of people in the world that have the opportunity to sit down and listen to 50 microphones side by side, as far as I know, it's never existed before.
Yeah. I really encourage you to go to Sweetwater.com and check out the Sweetwater Vocal Mic Shootout. It's an amazing experience, an amazing opportunity to hear all these microphones in your own studio, in your own listening environment, the way that you're used to hearing audio. If you'd like to discuss the shootout, there's a forum going on currently during the month of May 2017 at Gearsluts where you can talk about these microphones with other engineers. Thanks to Mark, thanks to Lynn, appreciate you guys coming in, and thank you for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.